Okay, so story is a series of elements. Is this something you're teaching? Is this something you're teaching in your classes? Story, plot? Uh-huh. So they should know. You should know. Okay. You should know, and I will tell you the same story again. So, story is the different elements. You are telling the story, but you can begin with the end of the story. It can be very interesting to tell you first the end of the story and then tell you how things develop in a way to produce the end of the story, which was at the very start. Plotting is the order of elements of a story, of a given story, in time, right? So time is an extremely important element. So of course, you can, for example, a very simple story is an itinerarium, an itinerary structure. You are walking from one place to another, and by walking from one place to another, you are telling the story how you come to this point, to this city, and then you change and you go ahead and further elements of the story. Right? Now, in a novel, you can begin with in the middle of the story and then go back how it all started and then go ahead. Itinerary structures are extremely solid. They are in the cradle, the birthplace of European storytelling. So, for example, the first novel in a modern European sense is Miguel de Cervantes' Don Quixote. And of course, this Don Quixote, it's an itinerary. It's going through Spain. And the models for this itinerary was the Pícaro, novela picaresca, was the picaresque novel. So somebody who was born in very bad conditions, and then he's rising, he gets powerful, and then he falls down again, and so forth. You know this structure of a novel? Yeah. And so you have the Pícaro, which is going through a given country and has different adventures. Adventure means things that are coming to you, advenire. So from Latin, it comes to you. And so it occurs to you. And this is the itinerary story. This is the itinerary structure. So you have a difference between story and plot. Right? So plotting means that you organize the elements of the story in a given way. You can start with the start, or you can start with the end, or you can start in the middle of the whole thing. Right? So this is very important in the art of storytelling. And the interesting thing is that from the very start of a written literary history, starting with the Gilgamesh epics, you have these kinds of different storytelling. You have a very sophisticated art of storytelling already in the Gilgamesh epics. So 2200 before our era, less. And this kind of storytelling is, in a way, in the Gilgamesh epics, it begins with something we can find at the very end. So the whole story can be organized not as a simple itinerary, but as a kind of circle. And this is something very, very popular as well. You have, even in Hong Lo Mong, you have structures that come back to a cycle. Yeah? And people love it. So, because you can recognize something, but you recognize it in a different way, because you have been walking through the story. So you see the same thing in a different in a different way. You have you have lived the story when you arrive at the final point. At the final point was the first point. So this is a philosophical conception by Derrida. It doesn't matter so much. Just telling you that when something comes back, exactly the same thing comes back, then you see the difference, la différence. So it's as easy as that. The thinking of philosophical thinking in French postmodernism, in Derrida's sense, is exactly that. It's the identity and the difference. Différer means two things. So report to something a little bit later and being different. Différence et différence. And so you can see that in a structure like the Gilgamesh epics, if you start exactly with the end, or if you end exactly with the start, then you can see the whole difference. The difference in telling a story. Because you can see the same thing with different eyes. And this is something that happened in your mind, that happened in the things you were living through. Because literature is about living something, living a story. Literature is a knowledge about living, is a kind of living knowledge. And in that sense, in the sense of all these figures, you have different ways of storytelling. You have different ways of storytelling on behalf of the different points of view. So, for example, if your position by telling this kind of scene is outside the scene, so as you look at this scene, you're outside the scene, right? You're not one of the dancers, not one of the figures. Then you tell the whole stories from outside. Yeah? You tell the story about, and you know everything about these figures. It's an omniscient narrator that tells you the story of each of these figures. And he is outside of this group, but inside of each figure. Understand? And so, this is the classical novel that dominates. It was created much long before, but that dominates the novel of the 19th century, the first half of the 19th century. But you can imagine that every one of these figures, every single figure in this painting, tells a story from his point of view. And telling a story means in a personal way. You have a personal narrative situation. Personal narrative situation as opposed to an omniscient situation, right? An omniscient narrator. And here, the different figures present their own perspectives. So, the invention of this perspective goes a little bit back to in European literature, and in Chinese literature you have that earlier. Goes back to the novel based upon letters. So imagine that each and every one of these figures is writing letters. For example, love letters. And so one of these figures fell in love with one of the others, and so forth. And everybody's telling a story, part of a story. And this is the model that was created in the 18th century. There's a very famous novel by Jean-Jacques Rousseau in French Romanticism, pre-Romanticism in the 18th century. Julie ou la Nouvelle Héloïse. You have all these different points of view of the writers of letters. Yeah? And the interesting thing is that all these different characters, all these different figures, they have their own vision of what happens. And this vision differs. It's different from each person. And that gives you a kind of polylogic sense. Because there are different logics inbuilt in each character. And if everybody has a different logic, then you can understand by reading this novel that you are able to follow different logics in this novel. So this was the invention of different logics in the same text. And this was a very important invention in narration, because then you don't have one logic that is like the narrator that knows everything, imposes one single point of view to this from outside to this group, but it is this narrator here in personal sense means that you are understanding the first person from the left. Then later you are understanding why the second person of the left is not does not love the first person. And the third one is standing outside and is this group, and so that there are different points of view, and and this is implemented in the novel in the 19th century. Of course, so for example, in the Honglo, you have this kind of changes of different already. It's very interesting. So the Chinese novel does not follow the same path as a European novel. You have seen that I brought different examples from the cave paintings. And there are many, many structures that are common to each cultural area these paintings come from. But then you can see that more and more different logics are part of the world. A different point of view is developed, and also the novel developed in China follows a different pathway from the novel developed in Europe, on the Western world. So at that moment, there is no such thing. Before the end of the 18th century, there is no such thing as world literature, because the different parts of the world are not related to each other. There is no relation between the way to the west, or I don't know exactly what the English translation is of Weg nach Westen, so one of the four classics, Chinese classics. At that moment, there was no strong relation, exchange mode between different cultures. So there is no such thing as a world literature then. Towards the end of 18th century, things change, and the mutual relationship is much more intense than before. So the term world literature was coined Goethe in 1827. So this moment when we have a strong exchange between different parts of the world. And Goethe speaks about the epoch of world literature. And the epoch of world literature, that means that that has a beginning. Because every epoch, it has as well as an end. And perhaps we are far after the end of world literature today. Because we can see that literatures in Latin America are developing in a different sense than, for example, in Western Europe. And in Eastern Europe, are developing in a different sense. And in Russia, develop differently if we compare it to Indonesia or China. So perhaps we are now in a period where these differences are much more important. And when you can see in all these figures representatives of different parts of the world. So you see? And so the important thing is that you understand that if you want to know a different culture, the first thing you should do, and the most important thing you should, is read about the novels or poetry or whatever of that region, of that cultural area, because it brings to you a specific vision of the world. We all have a different, when we narrate stories, we present different visions of the world. And narration is about world making. And this is from the very start. This is from the very start when narration and painting creates a world. We take some parts of the world and we leave out others. So in all these painting, all of these plants, you haven't seen plants. But plants were, of course, outside of the cave. But the important thing for the humans were the animals, and not the rocks or the plants. So you can see that literature is always about, and narration is always about, taking some elements and leaving out others, making a choice, putting things into the story and leaving out others outside the story. So you can easily take these figures as different cultural areas, figures that have a different view on the world today. If you want to understand different points of view, then the written language, the narration, the written, but I think it collapses. Okay. Can you hear me? Yeah. So the best thing is just to try to get into the narration of others. Remember the start of this class, the Sermon de Strasbourg. So if you want to avoid conflicts, if you want to understand others, try to understand their narrations in their language. This is what you are doing by studying different languages. By not sticking to one language you are born with, but to understand, to be able to understand other logics, other people, other ideas of inventing the world, of world making, of understanding the world. And strangely enough, in our times, this has become quite a problem. About 25 years from now, I thought that this problem would be resolved because relations, intercultural and transcultural relations between different cultures, you understand, would be stronger and stronger every day. It would be stronger and stronger every day. If you have a look at what is happening, if you have a look at what is happening in our world, this is, we are living in a world where the wars are really much back, and the misunderstandings and the polarization are at stake. So we do not so much think in the structures of the other. Remember, this was a very wise recipe to avoid a war by using the language of the other. By using the language of a different perspective. By using a different point of view when you narrate your own story. Normally, we do not change our perspective when we are going through the world, when we are in this world. But we have to create figures outside of ourselves, but inside our cave, in our head, in order to implement possibilities of thinking that we do not know ourselves, that are not our way of understanding the world, of making the world. But if we create figures that are able to understand the world and ourselves from different points of view, in a polylogical sense. So, in the following classes, I will historically go through different points of world making. And I will stress the fact that you can understand from a very polycultural, so many different cultures at the same time, or polylogic, so many different logics at the same time, by reading literature. Narration is an open process, and it is a process that will help you. It is a healing process. Think about and 1001 Nights. Who's ever read 1001 Nights? Never? Really? You should read it. You're too shy. Nobody has read the 1001 Nights? It's just about how to avoid death. I will tell you the story next time on Monday. But Jahre tell stories in order to avoid death. And if you are able to tell the story in a sophisticated way, a good way, you can avoid death. So literature, for a very, very long time, bibliotech. So you know that there are therapies based on literature. This is not what I will after, but I will show you that the healing process of literature is something that is extremely important for our life. Or in other words, as you have seen today, for the inner world we are painting in our head. For the world that is lasting and that will not disappear, at least during our lifetime, in our inner world. So something that gives us a community, something that gives us understanding, and how we can live in this. This is what it is. Second,
All right, so I'm trying to use a microphone without the battery. Okay. Thank you very much for Professor Ette's. I think it's very inspiring lecture. And actually, from these pictures, he has given us the way that we are narrating the world. So actually, narration originally, come from literature. However, it has been extended to translation studies. I don't know which major are you from, but actually, narration or narrative has been extended to translation studies, to art studies, as well as to computer science. So actually, according to Professor Ette's illustration, we know that for each narration, we have the very basic elements like follows. So normally we have the story. So that is the core of every narration. So in order to narrate something, you need to tell a story. And the second part is you have a narrator. The narrator it can be the speaker or can be the writer, but they have different perspectives. And he or she can also be the painter. And the third core element is semiotics, which is very important in today's lecture. So as we can see from the pictures that we have a lot of semiotics, and for all the semiotics, different people perceive that from different perspectives. And the last one is situation specific, because in different historical periods, you may perceive stories differently. So this is what I have obtained from Professor Ette's wonderful speech and lecture. And I would also like to just extend Professor Ette's narration about foreign language or language, because for all of human beings, we are using our own language to know the world, to understand the world. However, we try to use other people's language to express ourselves so that we can in the position of talking with the whole world and to just be in peace with the other nationalities and all the other nations in the world. So this is what I understood, from Professor Ette's lecture, and which means that learning a foreign language is very important because it is a boundary for you to know the world. So the language is the boundary of your world. So the more languages you know, and the broader boundary you are going to have. Okay, so I think that now we would like to give the floor to all of you who are enlightened by the lecture and would like to just ask some questions to Professor Ette. Okay, anybody? It is a very precious chance for you to talk with the master of comparative literature. Okay, anybody who would like to? Yeah, I see. Yeah. Or you would like to just talk with Professor Ette, later in person so that you can have a more closer communication. You prefer the closer communication. Okay, so I think maybe we would like to leave more space or opportunities for the students to talk with Professor Ette later. Okay.
On Monday, this class today was designed to have an introduction.
Mm-hmm.